Life at 34 was steady, predictable even. I had been married to Emma, 33, for almost a decade, and we had built a life that was comfortable in its routines. Every Friday, she would head to her book club while I stayed home, either catching up on work or indulging in a quiet movie night. It wasn't particularly exciting, but it felt solid. It felt right. That particular Friday didn't seem any different. She kissed me lightly on the cheek before leaving, her bag slung casually over her shoulder, and mentioned not to wait up. I nodded, barely looking up from my laptop, confident in the rhythm of our life. There was no doubt, no second-guessing. This was the trust we had built over years, or so I thought. After she left, I felt restless. Normally, I would have stayed in, enjoying the stillness of the house, but something pulled me out the door that evening. I decided to visit a nearby bar, a place I hadn't been to in years but held fond memories of. It felt like the right kind of escape, a blend of nostalgia and familiarity. The bar was just as I remembered it, dimly lit with a warm buzz of conversation filling the air. I ordered a whiskey neat, settling into the comfort of anonymity, and let the noise of the room drown out any lingering thoughts. Scanning the room idly, my eyes landed on a figure I recognized immediately. It was Liam. We had been close once, childhood friends who had drifted apart over the years. Seeing his familiar face pulled at something deep within me, a tug of shared history and lost time. I made my way over to him, unsure if we still shared the same camaraderie, but the way he greeted me dissolved any hesitation. It was like picking up where we left off. As we talked, memories surfaced, old names, shared mischief, and the way life had splintered us into different paths. It felt easy, and I allowed myself to relax into the rhythm of his company. The years apart seemed to shrink in that moment, and for a while, I felt like I was catching up with a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. Liam ordered another round, and as the conversation deepened, he began sharing a story about a recent night out. His words carried an air of mischief, detailing a spontaneous and passionate encounter with a woman he had met at a bar. The details of the story were vivid. The way she laughed, the color of her dress, the confidence she exuded. He described her as unforgettable, the kind of woman who left an impression long after she was gone. At first, I listened absent-mindedly, focusing more on the way his face lit up than the specifics of what he was saying. But then, something about his description tightened around my chest, a faint thread of familiarity that I couldn't quite place. As he spoke, he mentioned her name, and the thread snapped taut. Emma. The whiskey in my glass suddenly tasted bitter. My mind raced to rationalize the coincidence, to brush it off as impossible. Emma was a common name, after all, and there was no reason to assume anything more. But the way he described her, the little details that seemed too close to home, planted a seed of doubt that began to grow rapidly. I stayed silent, letting him continue as if nothing had changed, but my thoughts spiraled. I couldn't shake the unease building in my chest, a feeling that something had shifted beneath the surface of my life without me realizing it. When I left the bar that night, it wasn't with the same lightness I had felt walking in. The night air was crisp, but it did nothing to cool the fire beginning to burn inside me. As I walked home, I replayed his words over and over, trying to make sense of the growing dread. I resolved not to act rashly. If this was what I feared, I needed more than assumptions. I needed time, clarity, and above all, the truth. What had seemed steady now felt fragile. The cracks, hidden in plain sight, were finally starting to reveal themselves. The walk home from the bar was heavy, each step dragging beneath the weight of uncertainty. The details Liam had shared clawed at the edges of my mind, but the strongest voice in my head was the one dismissing them. Emma wouldn't do this. She couldn't do this. It was a ridiculous notion, a betrayal of the trust we had built over years. I replayed her face in my mind, the softness of her smile when she thought no one was looking, the way her hand instinctively sought mine during movies, and the comfort of her presence in the quiet moments we shared. Emma wasn't capable of such a thing, not her. She had always been straightforward, even blunt, about what she wanted and valued in life. Deception wasn't in her nature. Doubt crept in anyway, insidious, and relentless. I tried to push it back, grasping at memories to keep it at bay. Our wedding day came to mind. The way she had laughed through her vows, nervous but heartfelt, promising to build a life with me. Those words weren't just fleeting sentiments. They had meant something. They still did, didn't they? The nagging unease twisted inside me, questioning everything I thought I knew about her. But every time it began to gain ground, my mind rebelled, holding on to the woman I believed I knew. Emma was incapable of this kind of betrayal. She wasn't the kind of person who hid her feelings or let them fester into something this destructive. If there was a problem, she would have told me, wouldn't she? Yet Liam's story lingered, its details too specific to dismiss entirely. A green dress, a contagious laugh, a name that struck like a hammer against glass. The facts aligned too neatly to ignore, but the idea of Emma being at the center of it all felt absurd. She wasn't the type to meet a stranger at a bar, to have some fleeting, reckless encounter. That wasn't her. It couldn't be. By the time I reached home, I was exhausted, physically from the walk, emotionally from the war raging in my head. The house was quiet, and for the first time, its stillness didn't comfort me. I lingered in the living room, staring at the photos on the wall. There we were, frozen in time, smiling at the beach, celebrating anniversaries, and posing with friends. The life we had built together was tangible, real. I held on to that thought like a lifeline. Emma loved me. She had chosen me, and I had chosen her. Whatever Liam's story meant, it couldn't be what I feared. People see patterns where there are none. Coincidences happen. But as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I couldn't ignore the voice whispering in the back of my mind, asking the question I wasn't ready to answer. What if I was wrong? For the first time, I didn't sleep easily next to my wife. And for the first time, I wondered if trust could survive doubt, no matter how much I wanted to believe. The doubt had been gnawing at me for days, growing stronger despite my attempts to suppress it. Liam's story had planted a seed of suspicion, and no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the unease it left behind. Emma had always been steadfast, honest, and transparent. The thought of her betraying me seemed impossible, unthinkable. And yet the question lingered, poisoning my mind. That evening, as I watched Emma sit at the dining table, scrolling through her phone with the same casual ease I'd seen countless times, I couldn't hold back any longer. The tension in my chest demanded release, and I needed answers. I asked her, plainly, whether there was any truth to the story Liam had shared. It wasn't an accusation, but a desperate attempt to banish the doubt consuming me. Emma looked up, startled, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. She listened as I explained what I'd heard, her features softening with every word. She didn't rush to respond, taking a moment as if weighing her thoughts, but her reaction was steady and certain. There was no hesitation, no defensiveness, just a calm and clear reassurance. She explained herself with an openness that left no room for misinterpretation. There was no bar, no green dress, and no chance she could have been the woman Liam described. As she spoke, her demeanor exuded honesty, and her words carried the weight of someone who had nothing to hide. She reminded me, without judgment, of the trust we had always shared and the foundation we had built together. As her explanation unfolded, I felt the tension in my chest begin to dissolve. I could see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice. This was the Emma I knew, the woman I had shared my life with. The doubt that had been plaguing me felt absurd now, like a shadow vanishing under the light of day. She wasn't angry or hurt by my question, only focused on easing my mind. By the time she finished, I felt a wave of guilt for even allowing suspicion to creep into my thoughts. Her reassurance wasn't just in her words, but in her presence, in the way she carried herself. I realized then that I had let an outside voice disrupt the trust we had worked so hard to build. That night, as we lay in bed, I found myself watching her as she slept, her breathing soft and even. The storm of doubt that had clouded my thoughts was gone, replaced by a renewed conviction in her innocence. I resolved to let go of the lingering shadows, to hold on to the certainty that Emma was the woman I had always believed her to be. With that thought, I drifted into a peaceful sleep, more confident than ever in the bond we shared. Trust was fragile, but with her, I felt it was unshakable. For now, that was all I needed. The days following my conversation with Emma were calm, almost restorative. The lingering shadows of doubt had been replaced by the comfort of trust, and life began to settle back into its familiar rhythm. Yet there was still a thread of unease I couldn't entirely dismiss. Not about Emma, but about Liam. His unexpected reappearance in my life had stirred something within me, a blend of nostalgia and a desire to reconnect with the past. It had been years since Liam and I had spoken at length, and our chance encounter at the bar felt like an opportunity one couldn't ignore. After all, we'd shared so much of our childhood, and life had simply pulled us in different directions. I decided to reach out to him, suggesting we meet again. He seemed enthusiastic about the idea, and we quickly agreed on a time and place. A few nights later, we met at the same bar where we'd first crossed paths. This time, the air between us was lighter, free of the tension that had weighed me down during our last meeting. We talked about our lives, where we'd been, what we'd learned, and the paths that had shaped us. Liam seemed genuinely interested in hearing about Emma, asking questions about how we'd met and what our life together looked like. There was no hint of the story he'd shared before, and I began to think it had all been an innocent misunderstanding. As the night went on, the conversation turned to family. Liam admitted he'd never met Emma, and I realized how strange that was given our history. It felt like a gap that needed to be filled, a piece of my life he'd missed. On a whim, I suggested we have dinner together, Emma, Liam, and me. The idea felt right, like a way to bring the past and present together in harmony. Liam agreed without hesitation, his enthusiasm reminding me of the friend I'd once known so well. As we clinked our glasses, I felt a sense of optimism I hadn't expected. Rekindling my friendship with Liam felt like reclaiming a part of myself, a bridge to the past that didn't need to remain broken. And now, with Emma's innocence firmly in my heart, the idea of introducing them felt not only natural, but necessary. By the time we parted ways, I was already planning the dinner in my mind, eager to see how my chosen family and my old friend would connect. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely at ease, ready to embrace the next chapter of my life with open arms. Trust restored, friendship renewed, everything felt as it should. The day of the dinner came with a mix of excitement and an undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite place. I spent the afternoon preparing, ensuring everything was perfect for the first meeting between Emma and Liam. This dinner felt like an important step, not just in rekindling my friendship with Liam, but in introducing him to the life I'd built with Emma. A part of me was eager to see the connection between my past and present flourish. Emma seemed her usual self, focused and warm, as she set the table. She asked questions about Liam, his life, his personality, the things I'd told her about him. I recounted stories of our childhood antics, smiling as she laughed in all the right places. Still, there was something subtle in her demeanor that I couldn't quite pin down. Her laughter felt just a touch too forced, her smile too carefully measured. I chalked it up to nerves. After all, meeting an important figure from my past was bound to bring some pressure. When Liam arrived, his charm filled the room as it always had. He greeted me with a warm handshake and Emma with an easy smile. She returned his greeting with a polite warmth, but for the briefest moment, I noticed something pass between them. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, or something unspoken. It was so fleeting that I almost doubted I'd seen it at all. The evening started well enough. Conversation flowed naturally, with Liam regaling us with his stories of travel and adventure. Emma listened attentively, her responses measured and thoughtful. But there was a subtle tension in the room, an unspoken undercurrent that seemed to bubble beneath the surface. It was in the way Liam's gaze lingered just a moment too long when Emma spoke, and the way her laughter came just a fraction of a second later than expected. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was looking for shadows where there were none. But as the night wore on, the unease grew harder to ignore. There were small things, barely noticeable on their own, but together they painted a picture I didn't want to see. The way Emma's hand shook slightly as she poured Liam another glass of wine. The way Liam's casual charm seemed to falter when Emma mentioned something about her routine, as if it struck a nerve he didn't want exposed. At one point during dinner, I excused myself to the kitchen to grab more napkins. When I returned, the air between them felt heavier. They weren't speaking, but the silence wasn't comfortable. It was charged, like the aftermath of a conversation that ended too abruptly. Emma looked up at me with a practiced smile, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something I couldn't read. Liam, on the other hand, seemed to recover quickly, resuming his animated storytelling as if nothing had happened. I joined him at the table, brushing off the tension as a product of my own overthinking. This was my wife and my oldest friend. Whatever I thought I saw, it had to be my imagination. But as the night drew to a close, the unease remained. When Liam left, he clapped me on the shoulder with a grin that felt a little too rehearsed. His parting words about how lucky I was to have Emma lingered in my mind, the way they had the first time he said them. As the door closed behind him, I turned to Emma, who was already clearing the plates. She seemed quiet, more so than usual, and her movements were brisk, almost rushed. I watched her for a moment, the doubt I thought I'd buried beginning to creep back in. Whatever had passed between Emma and Liam tonight, it felt too specific to ignore. And while I wanted desperately to believe in the trust one had restored, a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered that not everything was as it seemed. The tension in my chest had grown harder to ignore, tightening with every passing hour. Emma's reassurances had been convincing, but the unease lingering after that dinner with Liam refused to dissipate. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was inventing problems where there were none. Yet, the images from that night, Emma's careful smiles, the unspoken connection between her and Liam, replayed in my mind with merciless clarity. The doubt became unbearable. I needed to put it to rest once and for all. Emma had left for work early that morning, and I found myself alone in the house, the silence pressing down like a weight. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the closet where Emma kept her things. The green dress, the one Liam had mentioned. I told myself I wouldn't find it, that it would still be hanging neatly among the rest of her clothes, untouched since she last wore it for a family event months ago. But the gnawing feeling in my gut pushed me forward. I opened the closet, flipping through hangers with shaking hands, but the dress wasn't there. My heart raced as I searched through the rest of the room, drawers, shelves, even the suitcase she sometimes used for work trips. Nothing. I felt foolish, desperate, until I noticed the laundry basket in the corner of the bathroom. It was a place I rarely looked, trusting Emma to handle those things. But now, it drew my attention like a beacon. I lifted the lid, and there it was, the green dress, crumpled and shoved toward the bottom. My pulse quickened as I pulled it out, holding it up to the light. The fabric was unmistakable, elegant, flowing, the exact shade Liam had described. But it wasn't just the dress itself that caught my attention. It was the faint stains on the hem, a deep red that could only be wine. As I brought it closer, a subtle but familiar scent hit me. A man's cologne, rich and musky, the same one Liam had been wearing at dinner. The realization struck like a hammer to my chest, forcing the air from my lungs. My hands trembled as I stared at the dress, the pieces clicking into place with chilling precision. She had worn this dress recently, despite telling me she hadn't been out anywhere that would require it. The wine stains, the unmistakable scent of Liam's cologne, it was all too much to dismiss. I tried to tell myself there was an explanation, something innocent that I wasn't seeing. But the evidence in my hands screamed otherwise. I sank to the floor, the dress still clutched in my grip, my mind racing with questions. Had she lied to me when I confronted her about Liam's story? Had she been wearing this very dress during the night he described? The doubts I had tried so hard to suppress now roared to the surface, demanding answers. As I sat there, the weight of betrayal settled heavily on my chest. The cracks I had tried to ignore were no longer just cracks. They were fissures, splitting open to reveal a truth I wasn't ready to face. For the first time, I couldn't convince myself of Emma's innocence. I carefully folded the dress and placed it back in the laundry basket, as though touching it any longer might shatter the last fragments of the life I thought I knew. When Emma came home, I would have to decide, confront her again or continue pretending I hadn't seen the truth staring me in the face. For now, all I could do was sit in the silence of the house, the echoes of doubt louder than ever. The green dress haunted me. Its presence in the laundry basket, stained with wine and carrying the faint trace of Liam's cologne, was a damning symbol of everything I feared. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront Emma. Not yet. The reality of what I'd found weighed heavily on me, each moment spent in silence pushing me further into a spiral of indecision. I spent hours replaying every moment of our marriage in my mind, searching for signs I might have missed. The warmth in her smile, the way she had laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny, the small gestures of affection that had always felt genuine. Was it all a lie? Or had something shifted, a fracture I hadn't noticed until now? I thought about the life we'd built together, the years of trust and partnership. Emma wasn't just my wife. She was my anchor, the person who had stood by me through every high and low. Could I let that go? Could I even confront her knowing that the answer she might give could shatter what little hope I had left? And then there was the question of forgiveness. If Emma had betrayed me, could I forgive her? The thought lingered like a specter, weighing every decision I considered. Forgiveness wasn't just about moving past the betrayal. It was about rebuilding trust, about allowing myself to believe in her again. But how could I do that when the evidence of her deception was so clear, so undeniable? At times, I felt anger bubbling up, a raw and consuming fire that demanded retribution. She had made vows, promises I thought were unbreakable, and yet here I was, holding the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. Other times, guilt gnawed at me, whispering that I had somehow failed her, that I had let her drift away without realizing it. I tried to imagine what forgiveness would look like. Sitting down with Emma, hearing her explanation, understanding why she had done what she did. Could I move past it if she told me it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment that didn't mean anything? Or would the knowledge always be there, an invisible barrier between us, turning every shared moment into a reminder of what had been lost? The thought of confronting her and hearing the truth terrified me. I didn't know if I could handle it, if I could look her in the eyes and ask the questions that might break me. But the silence, the uncertainty, was just as unbearable. As the hours turned into days, I found myself oscillating between hope and despair, between anger and longing. I wanted to believe in Emma, to hold on to the love we had shared and find a way forward. But the betrayal, real or imagined, loomed too large to ignore. I stood at a crossroads, the weight of my indecision pressing down like a stone in my chest. To forgive or to walk away, to confront her or let the silence consume us both. I didn't have the answers, only the growing realization that whatever I chose, nothing would ever be the same again. For now, all I could do was wait, torn between the life I thought I knew and the truth I feared to uncover. The decision came to me in the stillness of an early morning, when the weight of my doubts felt unbearable and the path forward became painfully clear. Confronting Emma, demanding answers, pleading for explanations, it all felt futile. Whether she admitted her guilt or denied it, the trust we had shared was irreparably broken. I couldn't undo what I had found, and I couldn't unsee the signs that had been there all along. I realized I didn't need her confession or her apologies to find my own closure. The evidence had spoken louder than any words she could offer. And so, I made my choice, to leave silently, without a scandal, without a confrontation. It was the only way to preserve what little dignity I had left. Emma left for work that morning, just as she always did. She kissed me goodbye with the same warmth as any other day, unaware that it would be the last time. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway before setting my plan into motion. The house was quiet as I packed my belongings, a few clothes, personal items, the essentials. I left behind the things that no longer mattered. Wedding photos, shared keepsakes, reminders of the life we had built together. I didn't write a note. There was no explanation to give, no parting words that would make her understand the depths of my hurt. Silence was my final statement, and it was enough. By the time she returned home, I would be gone, leaving only the echoes of my absence. Driving away from the house felt surreal, as though I were leaving not just a place, but an entire version of myself behind. The man who trusted so easily, who believed in the unshakable bond of love, no longer existed. In his place was someone harder, sharper, and painfully aware of how fragile even the strongest foundations could be. As the miles stretched between me and the life I had abandoned, I found myself reflecting on everything that had brought me to this moment. I thought about the warning signs I had ignored, the instincts I had silenced in the name of trust. I thought about the green dress, the wine stains, the scent of another man's cologne, and how they had unraveled the fabric of my marriage in an instant. Most of all, I thought about what I had learned. Betrayal, I realized, doesn't just shatter trust. It shatters the way you see yourself and the choices you've made. It forces you to confront your blind spots, your vulnerabilities, and the ways you've allowed yourself to be deceived. But it also teaches you something invaluable: the importance of listening to your instincts and valuing your own worth. If I could give advice to anyone facing a similar situation, it would be this: trust your gut. The quiet whispers of doubt are often the clearest warnings, and ignoring them only prolongs the inevitable. Confronting betrayal isn't about seeking answers or apologies. It's about reclaiming your sense of self and deciding what you're willing to tolerate. Leaving without a scandal, without a fight, felt like the only way to preserve my dignity. I didn't need to expose Emma's betrayal to the world or demand explanations that would only deepen the wounds. Sometimes, the most powerful act is simply walking away, choosing peace over chaos and self-respect over vengeance. As I drove into the unknown, I felt a strange sense of freedom. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to navigate. I wasn't tied to the lies, the doubts, or the pain any longer. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. And as I looked to the horizon, I promised myself one thing: never again would I ignore the truth staring me in the face, no matter how much it hurt.